Well, we need to finish up global prehistoric art today, which means we're in a hurry. But before I move on to our final work, I want to pose a question that ties a number of these works together. Why would animals have loomed so large in early art? Well, I hope you've just brainstormed for a few minutes, and I have a few ideas of my own. Animals would have been both familiar and frightening, both necessary to survival and threatening to survival. Today, our encounters with animals are pretty tame. We have pet dogs, we see polar bears swimming in the zoo pool, we buy our meat wrapped in plastic. But hunting, herding, and hoping not to become dinner would have been much more central to Paleolithic and Neolithic people's lives. Interestingly, the symbolic use of animals returns in a big way in our last unit, Global Contemporary Art. So here's a work we won't encounter again until spring. What messages do you think that the artist is trying to send? Well, Kiki Smith is, if anything, challenging the image of animals as dangerous predators. She also seems to be suggesting that women can tame the predator in wolves. Maybe the predator in men, too? Why do you think the woman is depicted naked in this drawing? Is she deliberately exposing her vulnerability to the wolf? Is she showing that she is not a threat? Is the artist suggesting that women are especially vulnerable? Now, I'm about to make an important point, and I want you to pay attention, especially since I'm going to ignore my own advice. The College Board graders will not want you to express a personal opinion in your essays. They assume that all of these images are excellent works of art. Don't waste words or irritate your graders by explaining why you like or don't like a work. Now, I'm going to invite you to break this rule, not on the test, but in class. What do you think of this work? Okay, my turn. I find this drawing a little irritating, mostly because I think it insults wolves, and maybe women as well. Wolves are sleek, elegant, and deadly, but they are indeed predators. They are not cuddly. And women who chose to cuddle with wolves? Oh, I think they're pretty dumb. I prefer my women smart, and maybe, when necessary, as deadly as the wolves themselves. Give me Judith cradling a severed head of Holofernes any day. I didn't know this work before it showed up on the College Board's required images list, and I expected when I saw it to discover that the artist was delivering an environmental message, too many cans in landfills or something like that. Turns out I was entirely wrong. Pea Soup Oh is how Samoans refer to canned goods. The former Chief Justice of Samoa wrote that, and I quote, "When Samoans were first introduced to the wonder of tinned food, this was in the form of pea soup, and no Samoan word can end in a consonant. So they tacked on an O at the end and made the Samoan form of the English term Pea Soup Oh. As time wore on and other edible matter arrived in tins, that's cans, the generic term Pea Soup Oh was used for all of it. Now it is more or less confined to tinned meat." I'll continue to quote from a reading you'll be assigned in the spring. It turns out that for decades, Pea Soup Oh has been a prestige food item eaten and handed out as gifts at feasts, weddings, funerals, and other special occasions in Samoan society. In this artwork, New Zealand artist Michael Tuffery comments on how an imported product has replaced local Pacific Island foods used in feasts and gift-giving. Throughout this work, Tuffery, an artist of Pacific descent, asks questions about the effects colonial economies have had on Pacific peoples and whether foreign intervention actually encourages independence or fosters dependency. By the way, he also notes that it contributes to obesity, which is a problem in these societies. At any rate, who'd have thunk it? So I've left out a lot of other animals that we'll encounter in the course, but we will encounter even more images of the male and female form. I was a little surprised that this work didn't show up on the College Board list, since the lady is very famous. This small figure carved from stone is about 30,000 years old, which makes her one of the oldest works of art that we possess. She's also tiny. Our AP Government and Seminar teacher, Dave Hauser, saw her in Vienna and shared this photo with me. Asked him about meeting her in person. Here are more works that aren't on the list but are important historically. Note the terms subtractive and additive, which are major art history terms that you'll encounter again. Additive sculptures are built up from a material. So, statues made of clay or cast bronze or welded steel are all examples of additive sculpture. And in fact, the Venus on the right is the oldest ceramic sculpture ever found, at least so far. Subtractive sculptures are made by whittling down a material, stone or wood. You should be prepared to identify sculptures in this unit or other units as additive or subtractive. But what really intrigues me is how cultures so far apart geographically and presumably without contact created such similar and bizarre sculptures. Do you have any thoughts about this? So let's turn to another of this unit's required works. What similarities do you notice between our two Venuses and the lady from Toltecal? Well, all of the women are well endowed, especially around the hips, although our Mexican figurine wears a smaller bra size. Archaeologists speculate that female figurines such as these had some connection with fertility, human, agricultural, or maybe both. The Venus of Willendorf and the Tlatelolco figure, sorry, I don't pronounce that very well, also have highly elaborate hairdos. Why? We don't know, although it's quite likely implies high status or maybe even association with the gods. We do know that crafting these complicated doos required meticulous craftsmanship, especially since these figures are quite small. In other words, these works were important to the artist and to the cultures for which they were created, worth the time and skill involved in creating them. But of course, what really strikes us about the Tlatelolco figurine is that she has two faces. Why? Again, we don't know. If anybody read the optional homework, you'll know that one doctor theorizes that people in the region may have seen babies born with an unusual form of birth defect, conjoined twins with split or shared faces. A more common theory holds that the two faces reflect a spiritual system based on duality: good versus evil, earth versus heavens, day versus night. Remember that term duality, it will show up again. Similar figurines have been found not only in tombs but in open fields. They may have been sown or ritually buried in the four corners of cornfields, again suggesting a possible connection with fertility. Here are just a few more figurines from the same site, including a double-headed, although not double-faced figure. The artists of the culture also produced so-called duality masks, such as the one you see in the left-hand corner. Like the carved camelid sacrum, these may have been used as masks in shamanistic rituals. This mask suggests the contrast between the living and the dead. Certainly the right-hand side appears to be a skeleton with a gaping eye socket. On a more cheerful note, I especially love the woman with the dog, which strikes me as having an intimacy that speaks to us across centuries. We have a replica of this statue on the marble on the mantle of our fireplace. So, we come to another of this unit's required works. What does anthropomorphic mean? Well, it means imitating a human, although not necessarily human itself. I find the title a little puzzling, since it seems pretty clear that these were grave markers, and surely the symbols carved into the stone on the left, at least, are meant to convey some information about a person buried beneath. What do these symbols suggest? Well, it looks to me like the figure is wearing a dagger and maybe a breastplate as well. So perhaps he was a warrior? Why do the readings make such a big deal over the display of human, that is, anthropomorphic images from Saudi Arabia? Well, Saudi Arabia is the epicenter of Islam, and the Muslim religion forbids the depiction of any sentient being, human or animal or god, in art. But of course, Islam was 4 millennia away when these works were created. So how does the artist use line to convey meaning? We've talked about the information that the design may convey, but note too that the stela has vertical lines to convey strength, horizontal lines to convey stability, and finally diagonal lines for drama. This composition is very spare, and the face is highly stylized, yet both of these images, to my mind, capture strong emotion. The guy on the right, not the required work, communicates extraordinary sorrow with just a few carved lines. This was a talented artist. And since we're talking about the use of line, note the similarly stylized geometrical faces on the lapita fragment as well. So what kind of faces do we find on this extraordinary piece from China? The faces appear to be derived from a combination of a man-like figure and a mysterious beast. Although the Jade Kong is meticulously crafted, it is still a Neolithic work without a written history. So theories about what its shapes and faces mean are conjecture, based on similarities to later Chinese works that might or might not carry the same meaning. We know that Kongs were found in large numbers in graves of persons of high rank, which suggests some connection to ritual. Some Kongs show signs of having been intentionally burned or maybe intentionally broken, and that might suggest a use in sacrifice. They were often found with bai discs, also carved of very hard jade, so hard it cannot be cut, only abraded with sand. Khan Academy, by the way, has a good short video about this process, and believe it or not, we did not assign it, but we did put the video up on Moodle. For now, you should know that jade had great significance to the Chinese and other cultures. Its hardness represented durability, and its color variations were seen as subtly beautiful. The square shape of the Kong may symbolize the four corners of the earth, while the central cylinder, like the round bai, may symbolize the heavens. This is true in later Chinese culture. We will return to these images later in the semester when we look at other examples of Chinese art. But for now, I want to move to our last required work for this unit, Stonehenge. Vocabulary is a lot easier if you learn a few Greek and Latin roots. Lith means stone, mega, I'm sure you know, means huge. So megalith is, yep, a very big stone. A menhir is a very large standing stone. We will encounter post and lintel construction again. Stonehenge offers an especially clear example, so I wanted to label it. Stonehenge is by no means the only circular stone monument found in Paleolithic Europe. Watch the first minute or so of this video to see several other examples. The video and readings we assigned suggest at least two probably related purposes or functions of Stonehenge. But since this is a Neolithic work, we, all together now, don't really know. So what were those possible purposes? One was almost certainly to serve as a kind of astronomical observatory. We know that the sunrise of midsummer solstice is exactly framed by the end of the horseshoe of the trilithons at the interior of the monument, and that the sun hits at exactly the opposite point at the center of the bend of the horseshoe at the midwinter solstice sunset. We also know that a number of bodies have been found buried or cremated at Stonehenge, possibly positioned in directions that lined up with Stonehenge's astronomical points. Recent scholarship on Stonehenge is focused more on its use as a ritual burial site, and even possibly as a site where human sacrifices were staged. So let's watch one more Stonehenge video. Sorry about the ad. The video makes a point that I tried to hammer home when we looked at the caves of Lascaux. Whatever the function, whatever the meaning of this work, Stonehenge was very, very important to the people who made it. Relatively poor societies invested enormous resources to construct this and other henges. Note, too, the video's emphasis that Stonehenge was part of an entire complex of ritual sites. And finally, we know that Stonehenge was built over a long period of time, and it went through at least 3 distinct construction phases. So it's quite possible that the function and meaning of the work actually changed over time. Speaking of time, I don't know if you have any left, but if you do, I would like to end this unit with another work that will show up in our final unit and frequently appears on the AP Art History exam. It's a favorite. So let's assume you are space archaeologists from Alpha Centauri's only inhabitable planet. You come across mysterious remains of this artwork, including this photo. What is the function, content, context, and form of this work? Do you have a guess? You come up with another photo. Does this help? Where are we? You may recognize Central Park, New York City, and the tall buildings suggest we're in the 20th or 21st century, right? Does this photograph change or add to your guess about the content or function of this work? Well, here's the title. And now that you know the title and a little more about the context, can you expand on your guesses? So this artwork, a so-called installation, sparked a great deal of public controversy. Many critics and New Yorkers loved the gates. Others didn't. The quotation on this slide comes from a question and answer session with the artist. Due to space constraints, I've just posted the answers. The fundamental question is the one we began with, the same question the judge asked in the case involving Bird in Space. What is art? Is this temporary installation, which cost millions of dollars to erect and then disassemble, art? How do artists answer? Try to restate this in your own words. And why does this critic question the gate's value as art? Again, try to restate his complaints in your own words. So what do you think? Do the artist and the critic have similar visions of the function of art, or do they have very different ideas of what art is supposed to accomplish? I don't know if you have any time left, but if you do, take some time to talk about the similarities and differences between these works in terms of the Big Four. That's something, by the way, you'll need to do on the art history exam. After your first unit test, we'll move on to the ancient Near East and back to monumental works that are made of stone, not orange cloth.